The day I was erased, the rain had already soaked the cemetery by the time Samuel Brooks was lowered into the ground. Charleston's oldest family stood beneath black umbrellas, offering polite condolences before quietly returning to their expensive lives. Only Eleanor Brooks remained beside the grave after everyone else had left, clutching the white rose her husband had given her every anniversary for 22 years. Samuel's final words still echoed in her mind. "If anything ever happens to me, trust the music, not the people." She never understood what he meant. She thought she still had time to ask. When Eleanor finally returned to the historic Brooks mansion on Meeting Street, something felt wrong. Two movers were carrying her piano bench toward the front door, while a locksmith was replacing the mansion's brass locks. Confused, she rushed inside. "Excuse me, what's going on?" The movers stopped, but before anyone answered, Noah Brooks, Samuel's 35-year-old son, appeared at the top of the staircase wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. His expression held no grief, only control. "You're back," he said coldly. Eleanor stared at the new locks. "Why are they changing them?" Noah walked downstairs slowly and handed her a single envelope. "Because this house is no longer yours." Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a probate notice claiming Noah had been appointed temporary executor of Samuel's estate. "That's impossible," Eleanor whispered. "Samuel would never." Noah interrupted her. "The court paperwork was filed this morning. Until the estate is settled, I'm responsible for the property." Eleanor looked around the home she had lived in for over 2 decades, the grand staircase, the portraits, the music room where she and Samuel spent every Christmas, and realized the staff was avoiding her eyes. They had already been told she was leaving. "I just buried my husband," she said quietly. Noah didn't respond. Instead, he pointed toward the front door where her 2 suitcases had already been placed on the porch. "You have 10 minutes. The words hit harder than Samuel's funeral. Eleanor slowly walked into the music room one last time. Her fingers brushed across the old mahogany piano, but before she could sit down, Noah's voice echoed behind her. "Don't touch anything. It all belongs to the estate now." Tears filled her eyes, yet she refused to cry in front of him. She picked up her coat, walked past the family portraits, and stepped outside into the pouring rain. As the massive front doors closed behind her, the new lock clicked into place. Eleanor stood alone on the stone steps with nowhere to go. Then she noticed something strange. Behind the upstairs music room window, one ivory piano key slowly pressed down by itself, as if someone inside the empty mansion had just played a single silent note. The rain hadn't stopped when Eleanor carried her 2 suitcases to the sidewalk. Across the street, neighbors watched through their windows, too uncomfortable to wave and too curious to look away. For 22 years she had been the woman who hosted Christmas concerts in the Brooks mansion, yet in less than 10 minutes she had become someone with no home. Her phone vibrated. It was Noah. "The security system is active. If you return without permission, it will be treated as trespassing." Eleanor quietly deleted the message, refusing to let him hear her break. With nowhere else to go, she checked into the oldest motel on the edge of Charleston Harbor. The room smelled of salt and old wood, but that night she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the piano key moving by itself inside the empty mansion. Samuel's final words returned again. "Trust the music, not the people." Around midnight, she opened the small velvet pouch she had carried from the funeral. Inside was Samuel's wedding ring and the silver pocket watch he never allowed anyone else to touch. As she held the watch, she noticed something engraved inside the lid that she had never seen before, Opus 17. The next morning, Eleanor returned to the mansion, not to enter, but to collect the last of her mail. A bouquet of funeral flowers still rested on the front steps, already beginning to wilt. As she turned away, the elderly groundskeeper, Mr. Walter, quietly called her name. He looked around to make sure no one was watching before slipping a small brown envelope into her hand. "Your husband asked me to give you this only if you were ever forced to leave the house," he whispered. Before Eleanor could ask another question, Walter hurried back toward the gardens. Her heart raced as she opened the envelope. Inside was a tiny brass key attached to a faded paper tag. In Samuel's handwriting were just 6 words. "Not the house, the violin." Eleanor froze. Samuel's antique violin had disappeared years ago after he claimed it was being restored, and Noah always insisted it had been sold. But Samuel had never sold anything connected to his music. For the first time, Eleanor realized her husband hadn't been preparing for his death, he had been preparing for someone's betrayal. As she looked back at the mansion, she noticed Noah standing behind the upstairs window, watching her without moving. He smiled, then slowly closed the curtain. Eleanor tightened her grip around the brass key. Whatever Samuel had hidden inside that violin was important enough for Noah to throw her out before the funeral flowers had even died, and she was determined to find it. Eleanor didn't tell anyone about the brass key. At sunrise, she drove to the only place Samuel had ever trusted with his instruments, Whitmore & Sons, a 90-year-old violin restoration shop hidden inside Charleston's historic district. The elderly owner, Mr. Whitmore, looked stunned when he saw her. "Samuel told me this day might come," he whispered. Eleanor placed the tiny brass key on the counter. Without asking another question, Whitmore disappeared into the workshop and returned carrying an old mahogany violin case covered in dust. "Your husband paid me every year to keep this safe," he said quietly. "He ordered me to release it only if you brought this key." Eleanor's hands trembled as she unlocked the case. Inside rested Samuel's priceless Italian violin, untouched by time, and beneath it lay a delicate silver music box wrapped in velvet. As she lifted it, a folded handwritten note slipped into her lap. "If Noah forced you out, he's searching the wrong place. The mansion protects memories, but the truth begins where music begins." Confused, Eleanor wound the tiny music box. A beautiful piano melody played for exactly 17 seconds before stopping. The tune sounded hauntingly familiar, but she couldn't remember why. Then she noticed 2 engraved words inside the lid, Opus 17. Her heart skipped. The same words were carved inside Samuel's pocket watch the night after the funeral. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a code Samuel had hidden in 2 different places. Whitmore leaned closer. "Did Samuel ever compose music?" Eleanor slowly shook her head. "No, but every Christmas he played this exact melody on our grand piano. Only once. And never from sheet music." Before she could think further, the bell above the shop door rang. A tall man in a black suit entered pretending to examine violins, but Eleanor instantly recognized him as one of Noah's private security guards from the mansion. Whitmore quietly lowered the front blinds and whispered, "He's been here twice asking about Samuel's violin." Eleanor grabbed the violin case and slipped through the narrow back alley while the guard questioned Whitmore inside. As she hurried through Charleston's cobblestone streets, the melody replayed over and over in her mind. Suddenly she stopped. Samuel's final words returned like a whisper. "Trust the music, not the people." She looked toward the distant silhouette of Brooks' mansion rising above the harbor, and realized the piano had never been an instrument. It was the key to something Noah had spent years trying to find. Eleanor knew breaking into Brooks' mansion would turn her into a trespasser, but Samuel hadn't hidden the truth for it to die inside those walls. That evening, she parked 2 blocks away and slipped through the iron garden gate using the same path Samuel had shown her years ago during a hurricane. The servants' entrance was locked, yet Mr. Walter quietly appeared from the greenhouse carrying a ring of old maintenance keys. "I can only give you 5 minutes," he whispered. Noah left for a charity gala, but the cameras reset every hour. Eleanor thanked him and hurried through the dark hallway until she reached the music library. Dust floated through the moonlight, and the grand piano stood exactly where Samuel had left it, untouched since his funeral. She placed the silver music box beside the piano and let Opus 17 play. The melody lasted 17 seconds, then stopped. Eleanor closed her eyes and repeated the tune from memory on the piano. As she pressed the final note, a deep metallic click echoed behind the bookshelves. One section of the library slowly slid open, revealing a narrow hidden room Samuel had never shown anyone. Inside were shelves filled with journals, concert programs, and dozens of audio tapes labeled with years dating back 25 years. In the center stood an oak desk with Samuel's handwriting carved into its surface. "Truth should be heard before it is seen." Eleanor opened the top drawer expecting to find the will, but it was empty except for another envelope. Inside was a single cassette tape and a note. "If you found this, Noah is already lying. Don't trust any probate document until Grace hears this recording." Eleanor frowned. Grace? The name instantly brought back memories of Grace Miller, her most talented piano student who had grown into an award-winning investigative journalist in Charleston. Before Eleanor could read further, footsteps echoed outside the library. Noah's voice drifted through the hallway. Check every room. I know someone's inside. Walter had been wrong. Noah had returned early. Eleanor grabbed the cassette, closed the hidden room, and slid the bookshelf back into place just seconds before the library doors opened. She slipped beneath the grand piano as Noah and 2 security guards entered. Noah glanced around suspiciously, then rested his hand on the piano lid. She's getting closer, he said quietly. Find whatever father hid before she does. Hidden beneath the piano, Eleanor realized one terrifying truth. Noah didn't know where the secret room was, but he knew something inside it could destroy him. Eleanor waited beneath the grand piano until Noah and the guards finally left the library. The moment the hallway fell silent, she slipped out, grabbed Samuel's cassette tape, and escaped through the servants' passage with Walter's help. Neither of them spoke. They both understood that if Noah discovered the hidden room, Samuel's final secret would disappear forever. Back at her motel, Eleanor searched through old boxes until she found a dusty cassette player she had used during music lessons 20 years earlier. Her hands trembled as she pressed play. Samuel's voice filled the room. If you're hearing this, Eleanor, then I'm gone, and Noah has chosen greed over family. Tears streamed down her face. Samuel continued. The probate papers Noah will present are false. I discovered months ago that someone was forging my signatures. I didn't confront him because I needed proof, not suspicion. That proof is hidden where only music can lead you. The recording suddenly stopped. The second side was blank. Eleanor stared at the tape in disbelief. Why would Samuel leave only half the message? Then she noticed something written on the cassette label in tiny handwriting. Grace knows the rest. The next morning, Eleanor drove to the newsroom of the Charleston Chronicle. Grace Miller, now an investigative journalist, froze the moment she saw her former piano teacher standing at reception. After hearing everything, Grace quietly opened her desk drawer and pulled out an identical cassette. I've kept this for 11 months, she whispered. Samuel had visited her secretly before his death. Grace inserted both tapes into a dual recorder. When they played together, the missing half of Samuel's message completed itself. Grace, if Noah files probate before Eleanor receives my original will, publish nothing. Help her find the truth first. The forged signatures aren't the real crime. Follow the paintings. Grace looked up. The paintings? Samuel's final words answered her. Noah isn't stealing the mansion. He's stealing the Brooks family legacy. Before they could react, Grace's phone buzzed with a breaking news alert. Noah Brooks announces historic Brooks Estate art auction, tomorrow morning. Eleanor's heart stopped. The priceless paintings Samuel wanted protected were about to be sold in less than 24 hours. And for the first time, she finally knew what Noah had been trying to hide. By sunrise, the historic Brooks Estate art auction had become Charleston's biggest social event. Collectors, museum curators, and wealthy investors filled the marble ballroom where Samuel Brooks's priceless paintings were displayed beneath crystal lights. Every masterpiece carried the Brooks family name, yet Eleanor's name appeared nowhere in the catalog. Standing on the balcony, she watched Noah greet buyers with confident smiles as if the mansion had already become his forever. Grace whispered, "If he sells even one painting, the evidence could disappear into private collections." Eleanor nodded. "Then we stop the auction before the first hammer falls." Grace quietly slipped into the media section, while Eleanor walked through the exhibition pretending to be an ordinary guest. One painting stopped her in her tracks. The Blue Magnolia, Samuel's favorite artwork. Hidden inside its ornate frame was a tiny brass plaque only Eleanor knew existed because Samuel had shown it to her years earlier. As she touched the back of the frame, she felt something unusual. The canvas had been removed and replaced with a perfect forgery. Her heart sank. Noah hadn't just stolen the paintings, he had already switched the originals. Just as the auctioneer lifted his gavel, Grace projected a high-resolution image onto the ballroom screen. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "before the sale continues, buyers deserve to know they're bidding on counterfeit artwork." The room exploded with murmurs. Noah jumped to his feet. "Turn that off. She's lying." Grace calmly displayed microscopic comparisons between Samuel's original restoration records and the paintings hanging in the room. Every brushstroke proved they were copies. Furious collectors immediately demanded refunds, and the auction came to a complete stop. Noah grabbed Eleanor's arm. "You've ruined everything." Eleanor looked directly into his eyes. No, Noah. You ruined it the day you betrayed your father. Security separated them as police officers entered the ballroom to investigate the fraudulent artwork. But before leaving, Noah leaned close enough for only Eleanor to hear him. He smiled, a smile that carried no fear at all. You still think the will is in the mansion? He whispered. You're already too late. Then he walked away. Eleanor's pulse quickened. If Noah sounded that confident, it meant the original will had already been moved, and someone else was holding it. That night, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about Noah's final words. You're already too late. If the will had been moved, Samuel must have expected someone to search the mansion first. Grace spread Samuel's journals across the motel bed while Eleanor replayed the Opus 17 music box again and again. On the 17th second, Grace suddenly noticed something unusual. Listen carefully, she whispered. That isn't the ending of the melody, it's a pause. Eleanor rushed to Samuel's handwritten concert notebook and found a tiny annotation beside Opus 17, Play the Silence. Samuel hadn't hidden a song, he had hidden a sequence of piano keys. Just after midnight, Walter secretly let them into Brooks' mansion through the greenhouse entrance. The house was dark except for moonlight spilling across the music library. Eleanor sat before the grand piano, placed the silver music box beside it, and played the melody exactly as Samuel always had. When the 17th second arrived, she didn't stop. Instead, she pressed 3 silent keys that made no sound because their strings had been removed years earlier. A deep mechanical click echoed beneath the floor. The piano slowly rolled backward by itself, revealing an iron hatch hidden underneath the polished wood. Grace gasped as Eleanor lifted the hatch. A narrow stone staircase descended into darkness. At the bottom lay a forgotten archive filled with shelves of recordings, legal files, and family ledgers dating back generations. In the center stood a steel pedestal holding a locked black safe. Across its door, Samuel had engraved one sentence. Music opens the room. Truth opens the safe. Eleanor smiled through tears. We found it. But as Grace reached for the safe, she noticed a blinking red light hidden in the corner. Someone had installed a silent security sensor after Samuel's death. Across town, Noah's phone vibrated. His security system displayed one alert. Music library, motion detected. Noah grabbed his car keys and smiled. She finally found the piano. He started the engine. Because he had been waiting for Eleanor to lead him to the one place his father never revealed. And this time, he wasn't coming alone. The hidden archive fell silent as Eleanor and Grace stared at the black steel safe beneath the piano. Samuel's words echoed in Eleanor's mind. Music opens the room. Truth opens the safe. There was no keypad, no keyhole. Only 12 ivory buttons arranged like piano keys across the front. Each button matched one musical note. Grace unfolded Samuel's concert notebook and noticed a sentence written in faded ink beneath Opus 17. The final chord belongs to the one who listened, not the one who played. Eleanor suddenly remembered every Christmas when Samuel intentionally skipped the last chord and smiled at her as she finished it. It had never been a performance. It had been a lesson. She placed her fingers on the ivory buttons and slowly entered the final progression from memory. The first 4 notes produced nothing. The 5th triggered a soft mechanical click. The 6th made the safe vibrate. As Eleanor pressed the final chord, the heavy steel door unlocked with a deep metallic sound. Inside were neatly organized folders, Samuel's original voice recorder, and a sealed envelope stamped, "Open only in court." But before Eleanor could reach it, the archive lights suddenly switched on. Noah stood at the top of the staircase with 2 private security guards. "I knew you'd solve Father's little puzzle," he said, applauding slowly. Grace stepped in front of Eleanor, hiding the envelope behind her back. Noah smiled. "You think that paper can save you?" Eleanor answered calmly. "It's not the paper you're afraid of, it's the truth." Noah descended the stairs and held up a legal document. "The police are already on their way. You broke into private property, entered a restricted archive, and stole estate records. By morning you'll be the criminal." Grace quietly pressed the record button on her phone. Noah continued talking without realizing it. "My father should have destroyed that will years ago. Instead, he hid it behind a stupid melody." Eleanor's eyes widened. Grace had just captured the confession they had been waiting for. Sirens echoed outside the mansion as blue lights flashed through the library windows. Noah smiled confidently, believing the police had come for Eleanor. But when the officers entered the archive, the lead detective looked directly at Noah and said, "Mr. Brooks, we have a warrant to investigate fraud, forged probate filings, and the illegal sale of family assets. For the first time since Samuel's funeral." Noah's smile disappeared. The detective's words echoed through the underground archive as Noah's confidence vanished for the first time. "Mr. Brooks," Detective Mason said, "you're not under arrest, yet. But you are required to remain here while we examine the estate records." Noah immediately pointed at Eleanor. "She broke into my house and stole private property." Before the detective could answer, Grace stepped forward and calmly handed him her phone. "Listen to the last 30 seconds. The recording filled the room with Noah's own voice. "My father should have destroyed that will years ago. Instead, he hid it behind a stupid melody." Silence followed. Detective Mason slowly looked up. Interesting confession. Noah realized what he had done and lunged toward the phone, but the officers restrained him. Eleanor turned back to the open safe. Inside lay the sealed envelope marked, "Open only in court." Beneath it was Samuel's original leather journal and a smaller velvet pouch containing an antique gold key. Samuel had written one final instruction across the envelope. "The will is valid only if Helen Carter opens this seal." Grace frowned. "Judge Helen, he planned everything." Eleanor carefully placed the envelope into an evidence bag provided by the detective, refusing to break the seal herself. She wasn't going to win through revenge, she was going to win through the law Samuel trusted. As investigators searched the archive, another discovery shocked everyone. Hidden behind the safe was a ledger documenting every valuable painting, antique instrument, and family heirloom Samuel had owned. Several entries were marked missing, with dates matching Noah's recent secret sales. Detective Mason compared the ledger to auction records on his tablet, and quietly said, "He's been selling Brooks family assets for nearly 8 months." Noah shouted, "Those belong to me." Eleanor looked at him with tears in her eyes. "They belong to your father's legacy." Just before leaving the mansion, Detective Mason handed Eleanor the evidence receipt and said, "Tomorrow morning, probate court will decide everything." As she stepped outside, dawn began breaking over Charleston Harbor. For the first time since Samuel's funeral, Eleanor felt something stronger than grief. She felt hope. But across the street, Noah sat in the back of a police vehicle with a cold smile returning to his face. He whispered to his attorney through the window, "The will doesn't matter if the judge never sees it." Eleanor didn't hear him. And she had no idea that the biggest betrayal was still waiting inside the courtroom. Charleston Probate Court was overflowing before the hearing even began. Reporters filled the back rows, art collectors waited outside, and every member of the Brooks family sat in tense silence. Eleanor held Samuel's sealed envelope tightly while Grace sat beside her with the recordings and forged probate evidence. Across the aisle, Noah entered with the city's most expensive probate attorney, smiling as if the verdict had already been written. When Judge Helen Carter took the bench, she looked directly at Eleanor. "Mrs. Brooks, I understand you possess an envelope left by Samuel Brooks." Eleanor stood and handed it to the bailiff without opening it. Judge Helen examined the wax seal carefully, then nodded. "The seal is authentic. This court will be the first to read it, exactly as Samuel instructed." Just as the judge prepared to open the envelope, Noah's attorney stood. "Objection. We have discovered a newer digital will signed 3 weeks before Samuel's death." The courtroom erupted. He projected the document onto the screen, naming Noah as sole heir to the mansion, artwork, and estate. Eleanor's heart sank. The signature looked genuine. Noah glanced at her with quiet satisfaction. "It's over," he whispered. Judge Helen ordered a forensic examiner to compare both documents. Minutes later, the expert looked up and said, "The digital signature is genuine. But the timestamp isn't." He explained that the file had been created 9 days after Samuel died, and its metadata had been altered to appear older. Grace immediately presented Noah's email requesting a probate clerk to update the estate draft, while Detective Mason submitted the recording of Noah admitting he wanted the will destroyed. The courtroom fell silent as the pieces connected. Judge Helen finally broke Samuel's seal and unfolded the original will. Her voice remained steady as she read the first sentence. "To my beloved wife Eleanor, who taught this family that love is chosen, not inherited." Noah closed his eyes. The original will left Eleanor ownership of the mansion, the music library, and every Brooks family heirloom, while Noah received a generous trust, but only if he never attempted to forge or manipulate the estate. By violating that condition, he had legally forfeited his inheritance. Judge Helen struck the gavel. Temporary executor Noah Brooks is removed immediately. The original will is hereby recognized as the only valid testament of Samuel Brooks. The room exploded with emotion. But Eleanor wasn't smiling. She looked at Noah and quietly said, "You didn't lose because I hated you." She paused. "You lost because your father believed the truth would outlive greed." The courthouse emptied in stunned silence as reporters chased Noah's attorney down the marble steps, but Eleanor never looked back. She walked outside carrying Samuel's original will, not like someone who had won a fortune, but like someone who had finally kept a promise. Grace hugged her tightly. "You got everything back," she said. Eleanor smiled sadly. "No. I got the truth back." Across the plaza, Noah sat alone on a stone bench after being released on bond. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from creditors, and for the first time in his life, nobody stood beside him. Eleanor quietly walked over. Noah looked up, expecting her to celebrate his downfall. Instead, she placed a sealed envelope beside him. "What's this?" he asked bitterly. Eleanor answered, "Your father's final letter to you. He asked me to give it to you only after the court decided the estate." Noah opened it with trembling hands. Samuel's handwriting filled the page. "My son, if you're reading this after a courtroom battle, then you chose wealth over family. I never feared losing my mansion, I feared losing you. Eleanor never replaced your mother. She simply loved us both. The day you stop blaming others will be the day you become the man I prayed you'd become." Noah's tears fell onto the paper. He tried to speak, but no words came. Eleanor gently said, "He loved you until his last breath, Noah. Don't let greed become the last thing you inherit." That evening, Charleston expected Eleanor to move back into the magnificent Brooks mansion as its rightful owner. Instead, she shocked everyone. She called a press conference in the mansion's music library and announced, "I will never sell this home, and I will never live here alone." Reporters exchanged confused looks. Grace smiled because she already knew what was coming. Eleanor unfolded Samuel's will one last time and read the final paragraph aloud. "If Eleanor wins back this house, I asked her to fill it with music, laughter, and children who cannot afford either." The room fell completely silent. Eleanor looked at the grand piano where Opus 17 had changed everything and whispered, "Samuel, I finally understand." Then she announced the creation of the Samuel Brooks Foundation, a nonprofit that would transform the mansion into a free music academy for underprivileged children across South Carolina. Outside, dozens of children gathered at the gates after hearing the news. The mansion had been built as a symbol of wealth. Eleanor was about to turn it into a symbol of hope. 1 year later, the gates of Brooks Mansion opened again, but this time there were no luxury cars, no reporters chasing scandal, and no auction signs hanging from the entrance. Instead, dozens of children carrying violin cases and piano books ran through the front gardens laughing. The brass plaque beside the gate had been replaced with a new name, the Samuel Brooks Academy of Music. The grand ballroom where wealthy families once held expensive galas had become a rehearsal hall filled with music instead of silence. Eleanor stood beside the restored mahogany piano, the same piano that had hidden Samuel's greatest secret, and watched her first class begin. For the first time since Samuel's funeral, the mansion truly felt alive. Grace had become the Academy's volunteer director, and Mr. Walter still cared for the gardens every morning. The rebuilt library was now free to every child in Charleston, while the underground archive had been donated to the City Museum as a permanent record of the Brooks family's history. Samuel's journals, recordings, and the famous Opus 17 melody were preserved so no one could ever erase the truth again. Every student learned the story, not about revenge, but about choosing integrity when greed seemed easier. Then the front doors quietly opened. Noah walked inside. He was no longer wearing expensive suits. His designer watch was gone, and he carried nothing except a small wooden box. The children continued practicing as Eleanor looked at him calmly. Noah slowly placed the box on the piano. Inside were the last 3 original Brooks paintings he had secretly recovered after the court case. "I bought them back," he said quietly. "It took everything I had. Eleanor looked at him without speaking. Noah continued, I spent my life trying to inherit Father's wealth. I never realized his greatest inheritance was you. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. She gently closed the box and said, Then stay. Noah looked surprised. As what? Eleanor smiled. Not as an heir, as a teacher. That evening, the Academy held its first public concert. 100 children filled the stage while families packed the restored ballroom. Eleanor sat at the grand piano, Noah lifted Samuel's violin onto his shoulder, and Grace conducted the orchestra. Together they performed Opus 17, not as a code, not as a secret, but as the melody Samuel had written to lead his family back to one another. As the final note echoed through the mansion, everyone stood in applause. Eleanor looked up at Samuel's portrait hanging above the fireplace and whispered, We kept the music alive! Because in the end, the greatest revenge was never winning the mansion. It was turning the place built for wealth into a home where hope could be heard in every single note.